To preface this review, I will say that the entire Shrek franchise I have not rewatched at all since I was a little kid. So when it comes to Shrek overall, I don't really remember that much and I don't really have any fond recollection of it because we're talking 15, 20 years ago is the last time I watched anything pertaining to Shrek. Now, a couple days ago, I did actually watch the 2011 Puss in Boots film for the first time ever in anticipation for the new Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. What I can say about 2011's film is that it's dog shit garbage. It was extremely derivative. The story was just very cliche. Everything was predictable. There were some funny scenes, but overall it was just a bland mashup of just fairy tale characters, if I remember correctly, a lot like Shrek used to be, just mashed into an extremely derivative, cliche, predictable, and stupid story with some funny moments. But overall, 2011's Puss in Boots was just garbage overall. Now, fast forward 11 years later, we get Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is funny to me before even seeing this film because way back a couple months ago when movie theaters originally started previewing this film's trailers and whatnot, I thoroughly enjoyed everything, absolutely everything that I have seen in the trailers of everything that I have watched pre-gaming for this film. This film, at the very least, looked downright hilarious and extremely accurate as a representation to especially cats and just animals in general. Now, I got to actually experience the full-length feature film that is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which, again, just a couple days ago, I looked on Metacritic and I saw, I believe it was IGN that gave it a 9 out of 10 and compared this film to the likes of Logan. After watching this film, I understand where they came from to compare this film to Logan because there are some beats that are very similar to Logan, but Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is literally its own animal and its own beast. It doesn't really do anything as far as the same for story beats or anything, but the heart that was in Logan is essentially in this Puss in Boots: The Last Wish film as well. Now, to start it off, what I can say, previewing the trailers and whatnot and saying that it looked accurate to the representation of animals, 100%. This story is based around the life of a cat having 9 lives, just like the fairy tale, the theory that cats live 9 lives, and the cat being Puss in Boots down to his last life after getting himself killed 8 times. And they do showcase every single death, and every single one was also hilarious. That's the one thing I will say about this film too, is that this film is downright hilarious through and through overall from beginning to the very end. And the voice performances are actually really well done. That was another thing I didn't like about 2011's Puss in Boots. They were just kind of phoning everything in voice acting wise. Now, Last Wish, they actually have soul into their performances. And that is the start of my review for The Last Wish, which is off to a really good start. The story, as I started to preface, is about the life of Puss in Boots, who is going on about his life in 9 lives, and he's on down to his 9th life at the very beginning, which comes from an excellently introduced intro for this film. The intro showcases the visual panache and style of this film and how it's going to be handled in the sense of regular illumination, full-length, big-budget kids animated film alongside like stop-motion kind of animation style. And throughout an hour and 40 minutes, you would think that transitioning, I would say at least in every action sequence, would be very jarring, but the transition was actually very seamless and very smooth going through the entire film. And not to mention, the action sequences actually flowed very well. Normally, in every action film, the action sequences are usually an erratic mess of just jarring camera placements and just horrible choreography in every which way. Fortunately, in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, just everything as far as the filmmaking of this film is handled extremely well. You actually can follow absolutely everything pertaining to this film and its story and filmmaking. Now, the storytelling of it is actually really interesting because even though this is a kid's film, I absolutely base every film or TV series that I watch and compare it to the storytelling likes of Game of Thrones, in the sense of one person's perspective switch to another person's perspective, switch to another. The reason I do that is because Game of Thrones perfectly built just a fully lived in world where it would go from this part of the country all the way to a whole different country and one other person's perspective seamlessly as their own perspective through the main story overall. And that's kind of what The Last Wish did with its story and its storytelling structure, although the difference is that The Last Wish's story is more linear, where everybody is on a one-track path to the same goal, but every character in this film definitely gets their 15 minutes of fame. An hour and 40 minutes, I would say, is basically broken up into 3 to 4 different POVs throughout the entire film, focusing on everybody's character's story, as well as depth and backstory and lore of everything. And not to mention, they have actually a lot of fairy tales, creatures in this film. And everything is remarkably well balanced just for any kind of transition to the storytelling. The story, in my personal opinion, is kind of like a kid-friendly Logan, but it's its own animal, as I prefaced at the beginning of this review. It has the same structure, but it's completely different. And also, comparing and blending the story alongside the writing, there are actually a lot of times in this film where the writing makes this film actually a bit more mature than you're expecting. Now, this isn't a graphic film, but there is cursing in this film, but it's definitely bleeped out. Kids can still watch it, but I wanted to preface that just to let you know, if you have kids, you watch this review, and then you go see this film, just prepare for that kind of stuff. But overall, though, this is still a kid-friendly film. It just kind of takes the notch up just a tiny bit with some censors. And that's what I really appreciate about the writing aspect of the story, too. They didn't just treat us just like every kid is in there to watch this film. There's actually a great plot in it, as well as great writing, and it's actually an intriguing film with a lot of personal introspective pertaining to a main storyline revolving around, I'd say, 6 to 8 different characters. One character's trying to run away from death and learning to not be a coward. Other characters are just big bads and just bad villains overall. And the other characters are just chasing a wish alongside family, and ultimately they want more of life than just that family that they have. And the funny thing is about this film, the absolute funniest parts, I would say, are the parts that they focus on the big bad villain who has no morals whatsoever. Not even just with his character, Big Jack, but more so the cast of characters that are involved around him and everything bad that he does to them. They're all terrible, god-awful things that he does to his henchmen and minions and the like, but the way that he does it to them and the way that the film presents those kind of tormented scenes are downright hilarious. I felt bad for laughing because I just felt bad for the other characters, but at the same time, they were just spontaneously happening throughout the entire film, and it was just downright hilarious. Now, Puss in Boots, as the main character, comes alongside Kitty Softpaw and this random dog that he meets and picks up, I guess, from the cat orphanage, which the entire 10 to 15 minute that we spend in the cat orphanage, also absolutely downright hilarious. That is the number one thing I will definitely refer to when I talk about this film being an accurate representation to cats. Hands down, they found a way to meld comedy relief with the storytelling of being a normal cat. And I loved it. I loved that they turned Puss in Boots into pickles. And I loved everything about that entire storytelling segment of this film. Now, that's not to bash any other part of this film, because I thoroughly enjoyed and loved this film. If I had to have a gripe on this film, it's a very minor one, but it's more so having to do with the very end of the film, where everything does fully wrap up with every character involved, which is a really good thing. But I'm not really a huge sap for everything ends happily ever after. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of payoff style for especially the entire cast of characters. But unfortunately, that is the minor thing that this film suffers from. They didn't stick the landing very well. It was almost perfect, but I'm just not a huge fan of happily ever after for everybody. It just doesn't feel life well lived to me, in all honesty. If, say, they had a character unfortunately die off at the end, and then one lived happily ever after, and then, you know, everybody just kind of had a different payoff in the very end, they don't even need to be tragic. They could all be happy, just not the exact same level of happiness. But unfortunately, the end we got was non-stop, happily ever after for everybody involved. Which, the way they did it, the way they presented it to us, made sense to the story and the writing. It's a very good happy ending. I personally just would have done a little bit of a darker ending. Now, the morality behind the story of this film pays off immensely throughout the entire film and by the end of this film. That's one thing I did really appreciate as an achievement for the ending of this film. Puss in Boots' whole entire morality-based storyline works out wonderfully. So, overall for me, I only had one minor gripe, and that was really just a personal opinion. In an otherwise completely flawless kids film that has no hidden agenda, no ideological belief behind it, this film is backed up solidly by just kid-friendly, good old-fashioned humor and a genuinely heartfelt, really well-written story, as well as amazing visuals throughout. And it doesn't just stop with just one animation, as I explained. There are at least 2 different animation styles in this that seamlessly transition throughout the entire film very smoothly. So even though I have a minor gripe for the end of this film, I still love this film so much. This is hands down probably the best kids film that I have watched in the last 5 years in a theater. So honestly, for me, I would say Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is an extremely solid 10 out of 10. Thank you. If you would like to support my reviewing passion to the fullest, please click the link in the description of this video to subscribe to my OnlyFans. Thank you.